Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise of Justice Movement, the podcast. My name is Zachary Mallory, and I am the host and the founder of the Rise of Justice Movement and the Rise of Justice Movement, the podcast. All right, you've seen her in the headlines. And now she's running for Congress. This is somebody that I've been following on social media ever since a specific situation unfolded, and I will let Karen Ortiz explain that part. But Karen, welcome to the podcast, and I'm chuckling because I'm nervous doing this interview, and I'm going to be fully honest. I am nervous doing this interview because this is somebody that I deeply admire, and this is somebody that's kind of helped me open my eyes as to what's going on, not only in the world right now, but also just behind the closed doors. So, without further ado, Karen Ortiz, you're running for Congress in New York District 12, and but you have a story that's led you to running for office. I know this is a loaded question, but first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here and that we could finally make it happen.
Absolutely, it's been a while coming. My schedule is off the rockers. Your schedule's off the rockers because obviously it takes a lot to run for office. It's very expensive. It's very time consuming, with canvassing, phone banking, gathering signatures to even get on the ballot, etc. It's a long process, but let's dive in. And I know that this is a loaded question, like I said just a little bit ago, but what's your story and how did it influence you to run for office?
I had never had aspirations to run for office or be in politics. I was quite happy being an attorney and an administrative judge and doing the work more quietly. But as you referred to, I have been in the headlines. About a year ago, I was working as an administrative judge for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and I was adjudicating employment discrimination cases. And we got a directive from the head of our agency that was based off of an executive order issued by Trump at the very beginning. I think it was like day one of his second term. And basically the executive order denied the existence of trans people. And once that executive order came down, the head of my agency uh, directed our judges and attorneys to withhold moving forward with cases where we had complainants who were trans and basing their employment discrimination cases, at least in part, on their status as a trans person. And this was in direct opposition to Supreme Court precedent in our own regulatory rules. So I had sort of took it in and I was waiting for management to say something or for attorneys in headquarters, which is in DC, to say something. And no one said anything. And I tried to get some clarity and raise, my objections to this through my regular chain of command, and I got absolutely nothing. Um, there were also a lot of other harmful things being done by this administration. ICE had started sweeping people up off the street, and I tried to raise that with management, saying, listen, um, you have a staff here that is witnessing what our own government is doing. At the very least, let's meet and talk about it, and provide a safe space for one another to kind of acknowledge what our government is becoming, is like metastasizing into. And I got no response. And so what I eventually did was send an email to the head of the agency, and basically told her that she really shouldn't have a license to practice law much less lead our agency, and that I wasn't going to comply, and that what what the agency was doing, what the administration was doing was immoral and unethical. That email was leaked. And to this day, I don't know who leaked it, but it was leaked on Reddit. And then somebody, about an hour after I sent it, someone from the New York district office came into my office and said, "Your email's on Reddit and it's like on fire. It's got like 10,000 upvotes," which I didn't even know what that meant because I never was on Reddit before. But apparently, it really was resonating with people, and getting people were very much on board with my sentiments. And then the press started calling me in my office. And I was like, oh my God, this was not, this was an internal email. So then I just decided to take control of the narrative, and even if it was at my expense, to use the opportunity to tell the public what was happening in my agency, which essentially the agency was being dismantled. And this was all laid out in Project 2025. So, um, and then, I started working with journalists whom I really respect and who built trust with me. And so there were a couple of pieces in the New York Times, AP, NPR, a bunch of media. And then I just continued to not comply. And eventually I was terminated in June of 2025. So I have an active whistleblower suit. It's very active right now. We're right in the middle of things. So I don't know what the end result is going to be, whether I'll be able to get my job back or will settle somehow. I have no idea. Things can change at the drop of a dime, depending on what the news cycle is. It's so crazy. So, but once that happened, I had seen how horribly I'll say the Democrats, because I was a Democrat, how they did nothing really substantial to protect trans people and to protect even the federal employees who were getting axed by Doge. That was Elon Musk's project to come in and quote unquote m- get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, which is a big joke in and of itself. Um, so I was really upset with the Democrats. I mean, the GOP has been acting this way forever, but I mean, for at least for the last 10 years. But I was so upset with the Democrats. And then I had another personal experience with my stepfather who had gotten ill, and I had seen him through the end of his life. I actually took a few months off from work. This was a few years ago, and saw him through the end of life. He had a cancer that was 100% attributed to his service in Vietnam and exposure to Agent Orange. He was a veteran. And even being, with my family having some resources, it was very difficult to navigate that. And so I started to understand more like how the difficulties that veterans have, and that we all have navigating our healthcare system. So it all kind of like foamed up. And then once I was terminated, I said, we don't have people in Washington that are willing to like go 10 toes down and go to bat and really fight for us. And then on top of that, the genocide of Palestinians made it very apparent to me that we are existing in a uniparty, and that the GOP and the Democrats really are very much the same and are willing to support and fund a genocide. So I said, we need people in Washington who have a moral compass and aren't afraid to use it. And I decided to run for Congress, which is one of the most insane things because I'm actually quite the introvert. So the whole process has been very difficult. But that's a long-winded way of how I made the decision to run for Congress.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with a lot of what you just stated, and it resonates very deeply with me because this is something that I've been struggling with, like my political ideology and just thinking about everything. I've seen how the systems have literally fucked people over, including my
Hmm.
mother, my own mom. And growing up with a disabled parent and growing up and seeing her being gaslit by medical providers, and both parties are complicit whenever it comes to healthcare. Like, yes, we have Medicaid expansion in Missouri, right? And I grew up in Missouri, home and or born and raised, and I just thought about the Fresh Prince of Bel Air in my mind whenever I said that. But it's just one of those things that just pops in my head every now and then. But thinking about,
I was
th-
chuckling so hard, I had to go off. I had to go on mute.
don't worry, I'm not gonna edit this part out. Because I think it bring it this podcast, I bring like a comedic approach to it too, because obviously talking about politics and talking about survivors, it gets very heavy at times, and it gets very like it gets very repetitive, right? And we continue to fall down this trap of capitalism, trickle down economics, which kind of brings me to my next point and what I want to talk to you about is money in politics. So obviously this is very broad. And I would love for you to talk from a legal perspective, and from like your own personal perspective, but also bringing your legal expertise here. Is what does grassroots mean to you, and what has been your experience with running a grassroots campaign? Because we know that there's a lot of PAC influences like APAC, J Street, etc., but also big oil and AI and like these AI data center, like it's all impacting the political structure that we have allegedly in the country.
Hmm.
And I say that very loosely because there's a lot of influence that goes into that. I mean, you have Senator Cory Booker that literally is on a book tour right now. Um,
People have called him now. His new moniker is Cory Book Tour.
like, what the fuck are you doing,
Yeah,
dude?
it's
Like,
really
and you sit here and say, "Oh, we need to do this. We need to do this." Your votes reflect otherwise, and it's not just Cory Booker. There's dozens that are exactly like that. But I guess what does give me a little bit of hope is there is candidates like you that are running and that will also be on that podcast. And I invite anybody and everybody from all across the political spectrum. If you have a story, you have a conversation, or you want to have a conversation about something, let's do it. But I'm going to ask you these hard-hitting questions because I'm not going to hold it back. I mean, if you're going to run for office, you got to be able to answer these questions off the top of your head. Like you're going to have to get used to it, or you're if politics is either you sink or you swim, right? And it's not one size fits all. But thinking about grassroots and the influence of money in politics, what has been your experience, and what does grassroots look like, true grassroots look like to you?
for me, grassroots means that you don't have an apparatus behind you and you're not taking corporate money. And I think so many candidates are using that, are characterizing their campaigns as grassroots when they're actually not. They have systems behind them. They have a built-in structure. They have a built-in volunteer base. They have even a built-in donor base. It might not be corporate, but there is a structure. So I consider myself true grassroots. I mean, somebody asked me the other day, "Oh, where's your campaign office?" And I said, "It's a desk in my apartment. That's my campaign office." I don't have money to rent additional space. I'm basically, as my money comes in, then I spend it on what I need to spend it on, and I'm actually funding a big portion of my campaign with my Roth IRA, which my financial advisor doesn't love, but so to me that's grassroots. I mean, you have candidates that aren't, corporate candidates, but they certainly have a mechanism behind them to uh, get the word out about them, to, like I said before, have a robust volunteer base. I'm literally building it from nothing. And part of that for me is because I never really had aspirations to be in politics, and my career really didn't. I've been in government my whole life, and so we have to toe the line. We really can't, especially with the Hatch Act that affects federal employees. We really can't talk about a lot of publicly about politics, and we have to remain neutral. And there's a lot of rules around that, not just in the federal government, but with the state and New York City. So. I didn't even have the opportunity really to get involved in local like democratic groups or political groups. It was just something that is really, I wouldn't say frowned upon, but you have to be really careful when you're a public servant. So I'm building from the ground up, literally.
Sorry, technical difficulties. Thank you for that. First of all, because you're absolutely right. There, even if it is grassroots, there is still something behind it. And we need to get money out of politics. But my next question is thinking about, money in politics, how do we, so obviously 2010 ruling, and I've talked about it, with all the candidates that I'm interviewing, but Citizens United, the 2010 Supreme Court ruling against the FEC, it literally opened the door to just as, further into capitalism and these big corporations come in and have this deep influence. But from your perspective, how do we, one, or, A, or, one or A, however we want to phrase it, how do we, one, get money out of politics? Two, how do we go about overturning Citizens United? Because there's a lot of steps to get to that point. And thinking about the current makeup of the Supreme Court, like, yeah, overturning Citizens United sounds like a really easy thing. But with a 6-3 majority of, thinking about
Yeah.
that, how do we get to where we want to be, where you don't have to worry about this, this corporate influence or these hacks like APAC. I hit hard on APAC because that's a big one.
Yeah, they're in the crosshairs. I
But
think
thinking about that, how do we get there? What's the
I think
steps?
what it's actually happening now, right? And it's like two tracks. It's being the whole problem with treating corporations and unions like people, like they can spend unlimited money on campaigns, which is essentially what Citizens United held. We can come at that from multiple angles, and it's already happening. I'm having conversations with other candidates, to thinking about how we can craft legislation to get around Citizens United, but an outright overturning would take the right case being filed in the right court, making its way back up to the Supreme Court, which is not impossible. It's just going to take a while. So at the same time, I think what's happening now, which is great, is that the public is becoming way more aware of how campaigns are financed. And there are groups like Track APAC and other groups that are exposing the donations given to candidates and really putting them on blast. And I don't think any candidates now are saying, "Oh yeah, I'm backed by corporate interests." So it's becoming a shame issue too, which I think sometimes is even more effective than, than a court case itself. So that's I think also with social media, it's a lot easier to spread the word about how a campaign is financed. And FEC filings are public. So if people really want to get info, they can. Like somebody asked me how I finance my campaign, and I said, "Well, I'm filing my FEC, my quarterly FEC report in a few days, so you can see exactly how little money I have." But I think like shame, exposure, um, groups that are putting the data together in infographics, ways that really educate the public quickly about what it means to be backed by PAC money, corporate money, and single dollar donors is really, really helpful. And I think right now more powerful than thinking about overturning Citizens United, just because that will take a very skilled set of litigators and specific case being brought into federal court to happen.
Which anything's possible, right? And I
Yeah,
believe that
yeah,
a better America and a better tomorrow is absolutely possible. I full-heartedly believe that. But we have to get the people in there that are willing to
yeah.
fight for that, right? And I know
And
that you're
also willing to say, like, my one idea I had was like, let's just put a cap on how much you can spend on a campaign, whether it's 100 grand, 200 grand, whatever it is. And everybody just has to adhere to that cap. That makes it a lot more fair.
because
You
there's
know,
a cap on like donations. I think for like
hmm
federal is 3,500.
Yeah,
Um,
3,500 before a primary, and then from the primary to general 3,500. What
which
happens though in that case sometimes, and I only learned this more recently because sometimes I'm a little naive, but a big donor can go and give 100 friends $3,500
yep.
and then they will contribute to a candidate and it looks like it's really coming from 100 different people when it's actually being funded by one person. So there's all those kind of tricks and workarounds that donors and candidates use to make it look like a campaign is more grassroots or people powered. That's another term that a lot of candidates are using too. So, yeah, so I think a cap is great. That way everybody will, you just have to be uh really clever
Strategic.
with how to use, yeah, your resources.
You have to be very strategic,
Yeah,
and that's what it comes down to. And being an elected official, you have to be strategic anyway, and like literally everything you do. So why not be strategic on campaigning,
exactly.
Kieran? This all
Show
makes
how you budget. And
it
especially
makes
like
you.
in a district like mine where it's high density, right? So I can walk my whole district. I could do it in a day. I'd be really tired, but like I just need a good pair of sneakers and some literature and I can be out there. Now, I know people who are running across the country like in Montana and have
Yeah,
huge districts and that's not as, you're going to need gas money and all of that. But I do think setting a cap would force campaigns to really think about what is worth spending their money on. And I think a lot of good can come out of that too, like new ideas of how to reach people. And then also just going back to basic, like pressing the flesh, meeting people and just talking to them one on one. I mean, that doesn't cost anything. And I don't need to see like a million ads. Sometimes I'll put Pluto on and that's a streaming service. It's a free streaming service. And I'll see commercials from one of my competitors like incessantly and they're not even that good. And I'm like, you're wasting money. Like I can't even imagine how much that costs, but you're not really, um, I don't know, some campaigns they just raise so much money and then they're just like, okay, let's just spend it, instead of putting it back into the community, which is another beef I have about fundraising millions and millions of dollars when that money could be better served actually solving problems in the community itself.
speaking of which, I love the way that Kat Abagazale ran her campaign in Illinois.
Hmm.
As far as, like using like the campaign funds to give back to the community and, you know, donating to like the homeless shelters that are in her district and, feeding people. Like that is the true like way. Sorry, there's something crying on the wall. ADHD brains going off the rocker, but I love the way that she ran her campaign, and obviously this was not the result that I had envisioned. But Kat is
Oh,
a,
I thought she was gonna get win. I was very sad, but
but
she
we
took
know
a
the
step
reason
back.
why.
Yeah, yeah.
We do, and it's exactly what we're talking about. So, whenever it comes to thinking about representation, as far as like there's 435 seats. Okay, thinking about that, what are your thoughts on like uncapping the House? And
I
Mr.
would,
Mr.
yeah.
B here in Kansas, he's a fellow Kansan,
I
but
love Mr. Beat.
yes, so he is a fellow Kansan. He's an educator, but he's just a badass human being. And he's endorsing candidates, across the
I
country.
would
And
love his endorsement.
let's make it happen. I will recommend you because I think he has like a little recommendation thing that he has on his website. But uncapping the house and thinking about that, there would be more representation. It would look more like our communities, right? Because there's only, and I know there's already like all these elections, there's all these primaries, there's all of this, but uncapping the house would expand and bring integrity to politics, right? Because let's be real, politics has never had integrity in it. It's always been like there's obviously been like things that were, like this is good, this is good, this is great, this isn't, or on the flip side, this is really bad. One of those is the money influence in politics. But what are your thoughts on uncupping the house, and
I would
what would
love
that look
that.
like?
I would love that. I mean, I think it's insane that one representative really is representing like over 700,000 people. And even in a dense district like mine, every neighborhood is very different. So, I think the representation would be a lot better. And let me tell you, from wandering around the halls of Congress, there are a lot of empty offices. So there's definitely room to uncap the house. I mean, I think we should have twice the amount of. I actually, I was talking to a friend the other day, and I was like, "Oh, we could have like 2,000 reps. It would be like a big high school." And
Literally.
so, but it would give so much better representation. You could really, um, like I said, in my district, the neighborhoods vary wildly, and I'm sure that is the same across the board. I mean, I know some of my other folks who are running in New York districts, like their districts are all carved up, all weird, and like the neighborhoods are very different. So, um, it makes it hard to really truly represent your folks. I mean, in my district, we have very well-moneyed people who, I would suspect, are not for taxing the rich and some of the other more popular uh, movements. And then we have people living below the poverty line in the same district. So how do you even, you know, marry those two? It's very hard. But I would love to uncap the house.
Mhm. And also expanding SCOTUS too. It's
Oh,
what are your thoughts on this? I'm actually genuinely curious.
I wish the founders would have put term limits for
Mhm.
actually for all elected um for all positions for the
Mhm.
judicial branch and the legislative branch, because people get too comfortable. I mean, my retiring Jerry Nadler, he actually was first came into office in a special election and and then just stayed like for 30 years, which is crazy. But with SCOTUS, like, oof, it's painful. It is painful how destructive SCOTUS has been. And Clarence Thomas was I might be dating myself, but I remember when Clarence Thomas was his confirmation hearings were going on, and when Anita Hill, who was a professor but used to work under him when he was the chair of the EEOC, which is my former agency, and she raised some concerns about sexual harassment, and he was confirmed anyway, and then he got a job for life, even though he's very problematic. I there was a lot of talk about expanding the court when Biden was still in office, and I was hoping, um, so I'm for expanding the court, but I'm more for maybe amending the Constitution to have term limits because it's wild to me that you can wield that much power and not worry about job security. It's
Yeah,
insane.
100%. Thank you for that. I'm glad to hear you say that because there's a lot of ways that we can make politics more democracy driven, right? There's a lot of different ways that we can do it. Um, what is due process? So whenever we think about, we hear this a lot, and we think about the right to due process is guaranteed by the Fifth and 14th Amendment. I always get this messed up. But the Fifth and 14th Amendment of the US Constitution, and thinking about, ICE as of right now, and I always say that if you're older than 2003, you're older than DHS. 2010, you're older than, the Citizens United ruling. Like I was born in 96, and I was brought up around, 9/11, the Iraq War, and seeing, what's happening now in Gaza and Sudan and Congo, and knowing that the United States is complicit in that. What's your thoughts on like due process and what does it look like from a legal standpoint? And I sat down and interviewed a attorney, Robert Held, who is actually banned from the East Camp, Montana, ICE detention center down in Texas. And a big focus right now is obviously ICE. We saw what happened in Minneapolis. Me and my mom watched the video of Alex Preddy, and it literally about destroyed me. As somebody who's worked in healthcare, and as somebody who also watched Mr. Rogers on TV, protect the helpers, he talked a lot about the helpers. And I think if Mr. Rogers was alive today, he would be extremely disappointed. And
Uh,
he would be testifying before Congress again, just like he
yep.
did to advocate for funding of public television, and just thinking about that, what is due process from a legal standpoint, and why is it important that we have this set in place for a reason?
So many thoughts. It's so, due process is so important that it shows up more than once in our Constitution. It shows up in the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment. And basically it's making sure that everyone is given a fair legal process or procedure if they're at risk of being deprived of their life, liberty, or property. So, and that it doesn't matter whether you were born here or not. Um, and oh, it's let me even so going back to the origins of ICE. I worked for the Social Security Administration on 9/11, and I was working that morning downtown in 26 Federal Plaza, and we saw it all happen. And even then, even as a young, baby attorney, I knew when that happened, I was like, they're going to use this to um I don't know if I necessarily articulated it then that this way, but definitely use it to increase the surveillance state. Um, and I had also recently, at that point, I was married with my first husband, and we went through the whole immigration process together. We're still great friends, not married anymore, but that process was hard enough with me having, a legal background. It was very scary. You don't know what the result is going to be, and I can only imagine how scary it is now for undocumented people. Um, and and the um and the way in which ICE is just acting with absolute impunity. I mean, there was an ICE kidnapping in East Harlem yesterday. I get the alerts, and it's horrific. So I think the due process is so important, but what's happening is this administration is so out of control. They're just ignoring due process. So it's like, what do we do then? And that's why I think there's been such a huge outcry and mobilization against ICE and a movement to abolish ICE, which I'm 100% behind. I think the immigration system prior to ICE wasn't great because that's when I went through the system. But it was a heck of a lot better than it is now. And at least I felt that my ex-spouse did get due process. Whereas I think if the situation were now, they just might have deported him to a third country, which is even more insane. But yeah, I did also watch the video of Alex Peretti and Renee Good being murdered, and I think this country has like collective trauma around a lot of things. I will say though that it's not just this administration. When I was a few years ago, I think this is about 5 years ago, I worked a detail. I was working at the EEOC, and then I worked a detail in Fort Bliss in Texas, in El Paso. And I was working with unaccompanied minors, girls 12 to age out to like 18, and doing 12-hour shifts. What happened was there was such an influx of children coming across the border, and that they set up these tent cities in Fort Bliss and other locations across the country. And just the short detail I had there, I was traumatized by that because, you know, I didn't witness any outright abuse, but I think the way that children were housed and detained is abuse. And I don't really talk about that experience a lot because I'm still unpacking it and I'm still quite traumatized. So I think the erosion of due process has been happening for some time. It's just that this administration is like, you know, it's like on steroids. So now we're really, really, really seeing some of what has was already happening since the creation of ICE. I still think about those girls. And yeah, and then I think about the work that you were talking about, Mr. Rogers, Miss Rachel has sort of taken the baton, and I so admire her and her using her platform to advocate for children at Dilley and the other detention centers and children all over the world, really. I mean, we really can judge our own society by how we treat children, and we are just failing woefully in the United States.
Absolutely, it's complicity and silence too.
Mhm.
And complicity equals compliance, right? And that means that we're okay with what's happening, and that's not the case. Thinking about the Lake and Riley Act and how it contributes to what's currently happening. What's your thoughts on the Lake and Riley Act? And I'll tell you this, there's a U.S. Senate candidate, Angie Craig, and she's running in Minnesota against Peggy Flanagan, who is the current lieutenant governor under Governor Walz. Um, she stated very recently that she regrets her vote on the Lake and Riley Act, and it's like it, I have a lot of thoughts here. I'm
I
not the
mean, people
biggest Angie Craig fan as it is, but thinking about that act, and this is not to diminish what happened to Lake and Riley. What happened to her is absolutely horrendous. It absolutely is. I will never not think about that. The person that murdered her got due process. So thinking about that, this sets a dangerous tone whenever it comes to what's happening in this very moment. But think about this act. What's your thoughts on this?
Um, first of all, I have to say I'm a little salty because when Ruben Gallego was running
Mm-hmm.
for Senate
Mm-hmm.
um in Arizona, I actually donated money to his campaign because I wanted to support more left, Democratic candidates in states that I thought could be flipped. So, and I don't give a lot to campaigns. So I was like, all right, I'm going to give to Ruben Gallego. When he voted for the Lake and Riley Act, I was like, I want my money back. I was so mad because it's so obviously racist and to me unconstitutional. So I think it's horrible. I think one of the first orders of business when a new Congress comes in is to take it out, take it out back and shoot it because it's terrible. It puts a target and we could just apply our regular criminal laws evenly across the board.
Mhm.
You know, um, white male violence is the most prevalent violence in this country, yet we don't have the equivalent of the Laken Riley Act for that. So I was horrified that it passed, really horrified. And again, not to diminish the murder of Laken Riley, which was horrible.
Mhm.
But I just think that it was also an excuse to put a target on brown people and again to further bolster the surveillance state.
And we see that also with like these flock cameras that are around the country too. And thinking about, the mass surveillance, and Congress has the power to enforce the Constitution, and we do have the anti-surveillance laws, right? And thinking about that, let's kind of pivot just for a second. I know we're coming up on time here, but I have just like one more question for you. And a very hot topic right now is obviously the SAVE Act. And thinking about the SAVE Act, what if the SAVE Act was to pass, which again, it sounds like it is DOA, dead on arrival. However, we got to make sure the way that things are currently going, we got to stay focused here. Um, but if the SAVE Act was to pass, what would voting look like in your district?
I think a lot of married women take their spouse's name, so that would require getting a passport. Not everyone has a passport, so believe it or not. So for me, it's a poll tax. I never took someone else's name, so I wouldn't have to worry about that, but it's a poll tax. It's expensive to get a passport.
But thinking, the SAVE Act, it absolutely is a poll tax. And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't we bar poll taxes and say, hey, a poll
Yes,
tax would be
yes.
legal?
Yes. And also it's an encroachment, it's funny, the GOP, is wants to say that they deferred to the states, give the states power, yet they're inserting themselves in how states run their own elections.
Mhm.
So it's hypocritical, it's a poll tax, and it's a burden.
It
The
absolutely
system,
is.
and it's also based on lies. They say that there is election fraud, and that's really borne out to be false.
Mhm. And they're still going after the 2020 election. And thinking about that, I saw them in Georgia and I saw them in, I think Arizona is another state. And then, just it just keeps bringing back these same exhausting talking points that have already been debunked and disproven. Um, but,
I mean, that's a
other
sign
than
of desperation too,
it is,
yeah. Which
it's
is,
like,
you can see the empire dying and it's just really trying to hang on and it's going to get extreme, even it's going to get worse, I think, and then it'll get better.
yeah, 100%. So, we're at time, but how can people uplift the work that you are doing, uplift you on social media, donate to your campaign, and just follow your campaign because you have a primary coming up. What's your primary date?
Oh, no, I don't have a primary because
Nope,
I'm
because
running
you're
as a progressive
independent.
independent. Right,
Yep.
I'm right in the middle of collecting signatures to get on the ballot, which is really a Herculean effort. So I would say if you're in Manhattan and you're a registered voter in Manhattan in District 12 and you see me with a clipboard, please sign my petition and say hello. But also, if you want to keep up to date with my campaign, my website is www.ko4, that's the number four, ko4congress.com. And that's most of my socials is KO for Congress. Um, and yeah, I'll be having more events, but right now I'm focused on getting on the ballot. So I'm pretty much on the streets just with my clipboard, and I have a small team of some volunteers, and then I have a field lead, and we're trying to just get the signatures I need so that I can actually be on the ballot in November. But any amplification too of my candidacy is much appreciated.
Absolutely. And we will add your social media, your website, and your donate link into the description of this episode so people can find you as well through there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, and I look forward to continuing watching your campaign. Let's do a
I
follow
would
up
love that.
conversation like later on this year. Obviously before the general election. I would love to get like your reflection like after the primaries are over. I would love to see just kind of like talk about that and what the shape of everything is at that point in time, not only in just your election but across the country. So I'd love to invite you back. Anybody out there who is listening, please follow Karen on social media at KO4 Congress, the number 4 Congress. And again, I'm Zachary Mallory. And Karen, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been an absolute honor. It's been very eye opening. I feel that your voice is drowned out in corporate America and this current state of politics in the country. And I want to do everything I can to amplify those progressive voices, which is why we created this candidate series, is to amplify the voices that are running across the country, defying, challenging that status quo and defying what it means. You know,
I'm so
I
appreciative of you sharing your platform with me and the other candidates because there are wonderful progressive candidates running across the country. And I know this because I know a lot of them and we're in coalitions together. So thank you for lifting us up.
absolutely. Please take care of yourself. Okay.